Real with Dr. Lil. I wanted to come on to do a couple of educational videos. I got sent some videos that have different examples of different cases, but the whole point is to show you what some scenarios could look like. So there's two videos here I want to play, and the first one is when a court order isn't an order. Can't say how they say that. When a court order isn't an order. So let's sit back and look at what they're saying in this regard.
Situation where a formal official court order might actually have no power at all. So today, we're going to dive into this really fascinating, kind of mind-bending legal idea known as fraud on the court. Right off the bat, our source material just drops this bomb on us, a nullity from the beginning. I mean, just think about that for a second. It's not saying the judgment is just wrong or can be reversed. It's suggesting it's as if it never even happened in the first place. And yeah, that's the big question for us today, isn't it? How can a document, signed by a judge, stamped, filed, just be treated like it's legally invisible? What on earth has to happen for the system to basically say, whoops, that one doesn't count? That is exactly what we're here to unpack. Okay, so to get our heads around this, we first have to explore this idea of a judgment that just holds zero legal authority from the get-go. It's a very special category in the legal world, and it has a very specific name. The key term here you gotta know is nullity, and it's important to understand this isn't something that's just voidable, something that can be canceled later. The argument in the source is that it is void from the instant it's created. It has no legal force, no effect, right from the very start. This slide really lays out the difference in black and white. A valid order, that's the real deal. It creates rights, it has to be obeyed, it can be enforced. But a void order, the source material says it creates no rights and is, quote, entitled to no respect. It's basically a legal phantom. So what could possibly be so serious that it just completely renders a court order powerless? This brings us right to the core allegation that's cited in our source material, fraud. And specifically a really serious type called fraud on the court. Now listen, this isn't just about one person tricking another. Fraud on the court is way bigger. It's an act that directly misleads the judge and subverts the entire judicial process. It's seen as a direct attack on the integrity of the system itself, which, as you can imagine, is why the consequences are so severe. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, the source alleges a pretty clear sequence of events. First, someone allegedly made false statements about what property they owned in New Jersey. And what was the point? The goal was to trick the court into thinking it didn't have authority, or what's called jurisdiction, over that person. And according to the source, that specific act of deception is the fraud on the court. And that brings us to the legal principle that's right at the heart of all of this: personal jurisdiction. You can think of it like the court's reach. It's the fundamental power of a court to make decisions that affect a specific person. If a court doesn't have jurisdiction, it simply has no authority to act, period. Now, a court's reach isn't infinite, right? There are rules. And this slide gets to the big one. For a court in a certain state to have power over you, the Constitution requires something called minimum contacts. It basically means you have to have purposefully done things to connect yourself to that state. So it's fair to expect you could be called into court there. So when the source alleges someone lied about having property in New Jersey, it's claiming they tried to hide those exact minimum contacts to escape the court's authority. So what happens if a judgment is actually found to be based on this kind of fraud? Well, it doesn't just quietly go away. As we're about to see, it sets off this massive domino effect with some really serious consequences. The first major domino to fall is this: that fraudulent order offers zero protection. According to the source, it can't be used as a defense by anyone who might have benefited from it. It's like a shield that just shatters because, legally speaking, it was never really there to begin with. And then you see this quote from the source, and it is just wow. It says that anyone who tries to enforce a fraudulent judgment is legally considered a trespasser. This means the trouble spreads beyond just the people in the lawsuit to anyone who acts on the authority of that void order. The stakes are incredibly high. So, finally, how do you even go about challenging something like this? Well, the rules for fighting a judgment that was supposedly obtained by fraud on the court are, as our source points out, pretty unique. Just take a look at this. That symbol says it all, doesn't it? Most legal actions have a strict time limit, right? A statute of limitations. But for a claim of fraud on the court, the source cites legal precedent saying there is no statute of limitations. It can be challenged at any time, at any point in the future. And the unique nature of this whole thing doesn't stop there. The source lays out that an order like this can be attacked at any time in any court, not just the one that issued it. It even argues that sealed records can't be used to hide the fraud. And maybe most importantly, it suggests the court itself has an active duty to correct an order it finds was rotten from the start. So we end here. This whole explainer shows a kind of legal escape hatch, a way the system can police itself against fundamental deception. But it leaves us with a much bigger question, doesn't it? When the very integrity of a legal order gets called into question, what does it actually take to restore faith in the whole process? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.
Over here. All right, good. I had to work with the little toggles. Hopefully, that was very informative for you to understand some things. You just got to put your own understanding. This is for educational purposes. Obviously, it changes from person to person, and not all of the stuff in there is 100% obviously not exact, but it's pretty much standard for whatever we're trying to do in the legal system. And it does not emphasize whether, I think they're talking about federal court or state court. It doesn't really matter. I think it's a generalization, because I think this particular educational stuff works from the Supreme Court down, just so you know. So here's another video I wanted to play. And tonight is education, everybody. So you don't always have to hear from different people, or one person rather. You can hear it from different sources of their opinions and things of that nature on the same subject matters or something similar. That's the point of this, because you get that information and it can help you, know what's going on. So let's look at the next video as well. This is another one that got sent to me, and I want to check it out as well.
Welcome to The Explainer, where we get our hands dirty and break down complex topics by going directly to the source material itself. Okay, let's just jump right in with a pretty fundamental question about our justice system. We think of court orders as being rock solid, the final word. But what if the very foundation of that order is based on a lie? So today, we're diving into a single legal document that makes a really powerful accusation. It claims a court order from way back in 2012 was basically built on a lie. Using this document's own arguments, we're going to explore the serious legal idea of fraud on the court and see why its author says this isn't just some mistake, but a full-blown attack on the idea of justice itself. So what exactly is fraud on the court? According to this source, it's not about one person telling a fib to another. Oh no, it's something much deeper. Something that corrodes the entire system. The source here defines it as a direct assault on the court's integrity. Think of it this way. It's not just cheating in the game. It's like rigging the entire stadium before the game even starts, so a fair outcome is literally impossible. And this brings us to a core principle that the document really leans on. Fraud acts like a poison. It doesn't just spoil the result, it makes the entire process invalid, right from the very beginning. And that leads us to one of the most dramatic consequences in all of law, the idea of a void judgment. The document really hammers this home. A judgment like this is treated as if it never, ever happened. It isn't just wrong or overturned. In the eyes of the law, it is a complete nothing, a legal ghost. Now, to really get how heavy this is, let's compare a void judgment with a voidable one. A voidable judgment, well, it has a flaw, but it's still legally valid until a court officially cancels it. And you usually have a pretty strict deadline to make that challenge. But a void judgment, which is what the source argues we have here, is treated like a blank piece of paper from day one. It never had any legal power at all. So what does a void order really mean in practice? Well, the document, citing legal history, lays out these key traits. It demands zero respect. It can't be used as a defense or a shield, and, this is huge, it has no statute of limitations. The argument is that it can be challenged anytime, anywhere, forever. Okay, so how does the document actually apply this big concept to a real-world situation? The core of its argument boils down to one critical word: jurisdiction. This is a foundational legal idea, right? For a court in a particular state to have any authority over you, you have to have some level of connection, what they call minimum contacts with that state. A court in Oregon can't just drag you in over a dispute you had in Florida if you've never even set foot in Oregon. So here's the sequence of events the document alleges. First, it claims an attorney told the court her client had no contacts with New Jersey. The goal, supposedly, was to get the court to drop the case for lack of jurisdiction. Now, the document also notes that the attorney later corrected this, saying she had misspoken. But here's the central accusation. The author argues this was no simple mistake. They claim it was a deliberate fraud designed to deny the other party a fair process.
But the document doesn't just stop with the fraud allegation. It pivots to another critical issue, the right to speak about it all publicly.
The author makes a very deliberate point to certify, which is just a formal way of stating, their belief that several court orders in this case do not actually stop them from speaking out. They're making it clear they believe they are not under a gag order. And to back this up, they point directly to the court records. They highlight a 2015 order, a 2017 order, and even an opinion from the appellate division. The argument is that none of these actually function as gag orders, and that, freedom of speech would make one pretty hard to enforce anyway. And here's where it all ties together. The author links the alleged fraud directly to the public's right to know. The argument is simple. If a court was deceived and there's no valid order to stay silent, then transparency has to win the day. So let's take a step back from this one specific document for a second. Why does this whole concept of fraud on the court even exist? Why does it matter? Well, it's basically the system's emergency brake. It's there to protect the integrity and fairness of the entire judicial process, not just the outcome of one single case. It's a way to stop and completely invalidate a proceeding that has been fundamentally corrupted from the inside. And this leaves us with the central question that these arguments really force us to confront. It's a question that goes right to the very heart of our trust in the justice system itself.
I think that was it, everybody. That is yes, sir. I think that was it, everybody. Pretty much this was an education night. It sounded like the second video was a little choppy. I'm going to go back to the person that gave it to me and try to get another copy of it and repost it for you guys. Apparently, there's been some similarities out there. Some other persons and groups and all this other stuff are having some issues and concerns. And we, I guess, as Americans, can stand together and do what we know is right when it comes down to a judicial system. But thank you all for coming over to Keeping It Real with Dr. Lil. As I said, I'm going to redo the video since it did come out a little choppy. And I hope you're having a good and blessed night. We wanted to do some educational things because sometimes when you hear certain types of things or similar things from other people, it starts to make sense more. Of course, there's no two cases and no two circumstances exactly right the same, but there are similarities and things that we can pull from, so forth and so on.